Hey Earthers, Nikki here, and I have made it past the midway point of the Expanse series by James S.A. Corey. So join me around the blue light readers today for my non-spoiler review of Nemesis Games. Nemesis Games was published in 2015, and it came out just a few months before the TV series premiered on the SyFy channel. And to be honest, you know, I've said it a million times before on this channel, I absolutely love the TV series. And when I went to pick up the Expanse books, like this here is what I was expecting to get, because in this, you get the POVs, finally, of the 4 Rocinante crew members. So you get to learn a little bit more about their backstories, their inner demons, and like, this is what I really thought I was going to be getting. And a lot of the Expanse, I feel, is quite plot-driven, with the exception of, surprisingly, the novellas are actually build character really well. And so it took me 5 of these massive Expanse books that are like 500, 600 pages a piece, 3 novellas and 2 short stories to feel like I finally have a handle on these main characters here, these Roci crew members. And if you're going back and forth on like whether or not you should read the short stories or novellas, I recommend that you at least read The Churn and Vital Abyss before reading this. And if you're curious what Bobby had been up to on Mars, because she's back in Nemesis Games as well, then you should read Gods of Risk. But otherwise, you can get by, of course, without reading those offshoots, but you might miss out on some references, or you might not appreciate certain plot points so much. And I was so excited to read this book because I've only watched up through season 5 of the show, because I'm trying to save season 6 until like I've caught up in the books, because I want to finally be surprised by the plot in these books. And I thought, oh, there's no way that season 5 of the show is like that similar to season 5 of the book. No, it is. Sorry, don't want to, well, so I guess, is that a spoiler? I don't know. But they're very similar. And so I had a sense of the broad strokes of the plot again. So there weren't really any surprises there for me. But what I enjoyed a lot about this book was the character building, and the inner suspense that you get with the characters really drove me forward, even though I knew like what the story arc was. So this book never felt dull to me, and I did feel like I was getting something different from the show. So what is Nemesis Games all about then? Most of human history had static maps, even in times of change and chaos, when civilizations had fallen in the course of a single night. The places remained more or less the same. The distance between Africa and South America was going to stay what it had always been, at least over the span of human evolution. And whether you called it France or the common European interest zone, Paris was closer to Orleans than Nice. It was only when they moved out to Mars and then the Belt and the worlds beyond it that the distance between the great centers of human life became a function of time. From Tycho Station, Earth and Luna were almost on the far side of the sun. Mars was closer, but retreating with every hour. Saturn was closer than either, and the Jovian moons further away. That everything came closer and then further apart was a given in Holden's life, uncommented and unremarkable. It was only times like this that facts of orbital periodicity started to seem like a metaphor for something deeper. It's been 3 years since the Rocinante, crewed by Holden, Naomi, Amos, and Alex, headed out to Illis, or New Terra, or Bearing Survey 4, or whatever you want to call it. At this point, the Roci is badly damaged from the events of Sibylla Burn when it finally docks in Tycho Station, and it'll be 6 months until the repairs will be completed. For the first time in a long while, the Roci crew is facing some downtime. But that doesn't mean that there's a time of peace for humanity. Martian civilization is falling apart. Martians are abandoning their terraforming mission for a new start on one of the more than 1,300 systems and habitable worlds beyond the ring gates. There's a sense of manifest destiny to expand human civilization. The once ironclad Martian military, the strongest in the solar system, has been infected by corruption, and military ships, weapons, and supplies are disappearing. Meanwhile, an extremist wing of the OPA is on the rise, executing terrorist attacks on a scale that the inner planets had thought they were impervious against. This book opens with the destruction of twin shipyards, one for Earth and one for Mars, on Callisto, which is Jupiter's second largest moon. The attacks were led by 15-year-old Philip Inaris, son of Marco Inaris, leader of this OPA terrorist group. Chaos is unfolding, and civilization is teetering. It's the first time we've had all 4 members of the Rossi crew separated from each other, and each are placed in life-threatening circumstances. Will they survive long enough to reunite? All right, I'm going to go through the characters by going in the order that they separate off from the rest of the Rocinante crew. So the order that they leave Tycho Station, because the Rocinante has like 6 months of repairs ahead of her. So starting with Amos Burton, he was the mechanic and the engineer on the Rocinante. And we learn about his backstory in the churn. He's from Baltimore, so you get a bit about his childhood. He's an unregistered person, so he had a very rough childhood, and he grew up in the underbelly of Baltimore. And the churn refers to when the rules of the game change, meaning that who's ever in charge of the underbelly of the Baltimore Underground, for example, when they're killed off, when they die, you get new leaders and you get new rules. And this happens every few years. And that's what Amos refers to as the churn. And he uses that term a lot in Nemesis Games. And so at the start of the book, we learn that the woman who basically raised Amos, Lydia, well, she died. And you get more about Lydia too if you read the churn. And so Amos is like, all right, well, the Rossi's docked for a while. She's under repairs. I'm going to go back to Earth, check in, pay my final respects, and make sure Lydia's affairs are in order. And it's been now nearly 30 years since Amos has returned to Earth. Amos he has some issues. He's a strange dude. So he's a man of few words. And when you get his monologue, like the stuff that's going on in his head, you learn that he's really gifted at interpreting motives. So he's able to detect where there's violence or danger. He's a survival. So if he sees someone with a gun on them, he's like thinking, all right, if they pull this on me, this is how I'm going to respond. This is what I'm going to do. This is how I'm going to get out of this situation. So he's really gifted at interpretive motives, at problem solving, specifically problem solving to accomplish his goals. But the issue with Amos is he has a hard time distinguishing right from wrong. And so he really only sees obstacles and pathways. And as I pointed out in my prequels review, that Amos's conscience is external to himself. He leans on others for that. And Naomi even points that out to Holden. She says, Amos is using you as his aftermarket conscience. Then the next member to leave Tycho Station is the pilot of the Rocinante, Alex Kamal. And so Alex figures, all right, I am going to go back to Mars and check in on my ex-wife, which is like the worst idea ever because he was married to her for like at least a decade. Maybe it was a couple decades. And the thing is, once he retired from the Navy and they were supposed to be all like happily ever after, he got all antsy and he signed up to be the pilot for that ice hauler, the Canterbury, which is how he ends up meeting Holden, Naomi, and Amos. So then that's why they got divorced. Like he just didn't want to be home having the normal life. And so he's going to go like check in on her now after all this time. Anyway, you can imagine how that goes. And I do really like Alex's POV. His POV might be my favorite POV because he's so introspective. And I don't know, he has this really genial personality, and of course he's most definitely flawed, but he notices these little details in people's mannerisms, and he does seem to genuinely care about people, and he notices small details in people's mannerisms, but he kind of is not able to see how he comes off to others, I think, is one of his limitations. So the next Rocinante crew member to leave Tycho Station is the XO, Naomi. And Naomi has been quite mysterious to all of us thus far. We know that she's been with Holden now, like definitely over 5 years, probably like 7 years, something like that. And like through Holden, we don't get that much of her. So it was really nice to finally get her perspective. She gets called back to Ceres Station to deal with some unfinished business with the OPA extremists who she had a past with. And this is all stuff that she has kept secret from Holden. And Naomi's perspective, we get a little more about like environmental details. She's very aware of her body and how she's feeling. So she is very much aware of things that are going on externally, internally. And so this contrasts with Holden quite a bit, since Holden is not that perceptive. And I think really, like, they're mostly opposites, like they're complementary, like yin and yang. So I do think that ultimately Naomi and Holden do fit together well. And we learn Naomi's secrets in Nemesis Games. So if that's something you're interested in, definitely pick this up. And through her perspective, we spend a lot of time with her in her own internal hell. And she has a character that actually has been like held captive or imprisoned at different points in the book so far. But you also learn that she is like internally held captive by her past. And her past is the stuff that soap operas are made of. All right, then we get our captain, James Holden, and he has stayed behind with the ship on Tycho Station. So he's hanging out, helping out with repairs, meeting with Fred Johnson, who's head of Tycho Station. He's also having some meetings with Monica Stewart, who's the reporter who broke the story of the protomolecule and reported from the slow zone on Abaddon's Gate. So she's had some like really high level fame with the protomolecule stuff, and she's looking for her next scoop. And she's noticed that there are ships entering the ring gate but not reappearing on the other side. And so she thinks that it has something to do with the protomolecule. Well, she kind of hopes it has something to do with the protomolecule because that makes for a better story. And Holden's like, I think you're jumping to conclusions here. I think it's just people pirating ships and changing their names. Like, that's it. And I think this part's cute. He's like, you know the old joke about hearing hoofbeats, right? Long story, but the point is that if you hear hoofbeats in the distance, your first guess is that they're horses, not zebras, and you're hearing hoofbeats and jumping straight to unicorns, which is true. I like Holden's personality, even though he's not super deep. I do like his personality. But there's a scene with Fred Johnson that I also think just captures Holden in a nutshell, where I don't want to spoil anything, but Holden gets his hands on a terminal that isn't his, and there's a big button on it. And so, of course, he presses the button, and Fred's like, what did you do? He's like, there was a button. I pressed it. And Fred's like, wow, that is really how you go through life, isn't it? And that is really how Holden goes through life. Like, he is not deep, but he tries to do the right thing, and I think he's a pretty good captain. But the thing is he mostly leaps without a second thought. He's like, into the fire to save the princess, and that's it. Like, he just doesn't think twice. But that is Holden. And something else that I really liked about Nemesis Games is we got a lot of familiar characters, which feels nice sometimes because in this series, there's so many characters, and now I'm like starting to get used to more of them, and some of the favorites are coming back. And so through Alex, you also get Bobby Draper, since she's on Mars. She's a veteran for the Martian Marines, and she's working in the Veterans Affairs Office, but she's also doing some side jobs for Avasarala. Bobby has also noticed that some Martian warships, Martian supplies, Martian weapons have gone missing. Okay, and so she's trying to recruit Alex to help her out with this. Okay, so she and Alex are doing a similar investigation to what Holden and Monica are doing. And Avasarala makes some cameos, and she's getting more and more powerful in the UN. So it's always fun to have Avasarala around. So she has some screen time with just about everyone in the POVs. And then we get Clarissa Mao again, and we had her POV back in Abaddon's Gate. And she did some bad things in Abaddon's Gate. So she is in prison for life. She's spending time in the pit on Earth in Bethlehem. I'm assuming it's Bethlehem, Maryland, since this is supposed to be like kind of isolated and in the Chesapeake Bay Conservancy area. So this would be like southeast of Baltimore. So that is where she is. So we get her perspective through Amos. And then Fred spends quite a bit of time with Holden, and I was really happy that I did read Fred's backstory in The Butcher of Anderson Station first, since this book I think is where you get the most Fred, and I like Fred's character as well. All right, let's get into what I liked, and I absolutely loved the characters and how each one of them feel different from each other, and they all have flaws. I've been waiting for this for a while to get to know the Rocinante crew members better, because they were just so mysterious to me through Holden's perspective, because apparently he's not thinking that much about their past, or it seems like he doesn't really know that much about their pasts. And also because now all the crew members have been separated, you get a better sense of how intelligent, brave, and resourceful each and every one of them is. And their strengths complement each other really, really well. And so it's clear how they have survived so long running a skeleton crew on the Rocinante and missed this like insane plethora of like danger and chaos and all of the proto-molecule stuff all the time. And the other thing that I really liked is that when Holden is doing his investigation on Tycho Station, he gets like super into the investigation, like, I don't know, maybe fulfilling an investigator role when he's investigating the mission ships. And I feel like this is homage to Miller. And so it's like part of Miller's personality is like starting to overlap with Holden's a little bit, or like Holden's starting to resemble Miller a little bit. So maybe this is just because Holden is a bit wiser now. He's getting a little bit more careful, a little bit more cynical. Or maybe, does this mean that the proto-molecule is still in play in his mind? Could that be what it's trying to show us? Or maybe the presence of the proto-Miller in Holden's mind has left an imprint somewhere. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And thing is, like, yeah, I like action. I think action translates a little better to the screen than in books. In books, I absolutely love suspense. And I thought this book had the best suspense yet. Like, just because it's like this internal suspense where you really care about the characters and you're like, are they going to make it out of this situation? Are they going to be okay? Like, please be okay. And so I really, really did like that aspect. So one side note, there's a Commander Duar on Mars. And for some reason, I was just like totally envisioning Admiral Adama. So either way, in my head, that character is played by Edward James almost. Always and forever. All right, so there were some cute moments, I thought, in this book as well. Like, okay, so when Amos is I think he's in Pennsylvania on Earth, he walks by one of those fancy stores with security guards, and so he imagines having his pretty woman moment where he goes in there and buys something expensive and pointless just to prove that he has way more money than his appearance would suggest. Another thing that I thought was cute is the term flying tea kettle to describe an engine that actually burns mass, okay, rather than like their fusion or like Epstein drives. So they're running tea kettle. And I learned a couple of vocabulary words from this book that I want to share with you. And like, I don't know, maybe I'm silly for not knowing these things, but I thought, if I don't know them, maybe other people don't either. So maudlin, that's an adjective, and it means drunk enough to be emotionally silly. And then sortie, that's a noun, and that's like usually kind of a military term, and it means foray, raid, excursion, or expedition. And I just thought it was like a cute like version of sort. I don't know what I thought it was. I was like, oh, that's a cute term. Like it sounded like something to me from the Buffyverse, like sortie. Anyway, and then lastly, finally, I found Drummer. She is in this book just when I had given up hope that she does not exist in the books at all, because she's like my favorite character in the TV series. She appears in Nemesis Games. And that brings me to my dislikes. There's not enough Drummer. Like, she's so minor. She's just like head of security for Tycho Station. I thought there'd be more to her in this. So maybe in the future something happens. But either way, she's a fantastic character on the TV series. All right, and another more real thing that I did not just like is, okay, the relationship between Naomi and Holden. It's just, I can't buy it because they've been together for like 7 years or something like that. And Naomi has all these secrets that she has hidden away from Holden. And they honestly like just talk to each other so little. Like they just don't talk about their pasts at all. Like I cannot fathom it. And like Holden has this mindset of, oh, you don't have to tell me about your past. Absolute garbage. That is crap. So, all right. So I've been married to Jordan for 11 years in a few days. So on Earth Day. And if all of a sudden I learned like these different things about his past that would like similar to Naomi's, like let's hope that person doesn't exist, let's just say. But if I found like all these like deep dark secrets out about him, he would just instantly become a stranger to me. It'd be like, wow, I did not know you at all. And I just don't know how a relationship like that can be successful. But I'm finding it very frustrating. So I guess that's just good drama and good writing and good tension. So fine. But really, that's not healthy. Okay. Also, Amos. In all his parts, he refers to Clarissa as Peaches, which, okay, once or twice, whatever, but it's all the time. And after a while, it gets very, very grating. And I know that he refers to her as Peaches at the very end of Abaddon's Gate. And I also know that, or I also get the sense that he's kind of renamed her to give her this new identity. So like, obviously he's not going to call her by her name in front of others because she has this criminal history. But really, Peaches, it gets like, it's like nails on the chalkboard a little bit. And I don't actually have a problem with this. I'm just going to point it out. There are some things that happen in the plot that is very, very much far-fetched and unlikely. And it definitely does seem like James S.A. Corey did like very careful research on this, like to make sure different things were like somewhat like possible, or, you know, like looking at the extremes of it. But I thought it made for really suspenseful, entertaining scenes, and that's what I'm here for. So really no complaints on that, but you might hear those complaints from others, I'm sure. All right, let's get into my rating. So for story, I rated it an 8.5 out of 10. And yes, there's a lot going on. There's all these big catastrophes and terrorist attacks. But really, the main storyline here, or the big issue is, will the Rosie crew reunite? Will they get back together? Will they make it? And it's not so much focused on the proto-molecule in this book, even though that's really been like the strain like throughout the whole series so far. There are a couple major purposes that I see of this book. You get more attached to the Rosie crew members, that's for sure. And secondly, the stage is set for later books. Okay, where I'm sure the proto-molecule is probably going to become more important again, just like judging by the name of the last book, Leviathan Falls, right? Because the protomolecule is the Leviathan. All right, so then that brings me to characters. Characters, I rated a 9.5 out of 10. I thought the characters were awesome. This is what I've been waiting for. I loved the POVs. I loved that we got Avasarala and Bobby and Fred back and even Monica, and Clarissa. I loved that. Okay, so we got to get their backstories finally. I got a lot of things that I wanted with the characters. They all felt different from each other. They're all flawed. I could tell, even if you rubbed out the names or the context, I could tell which characters I was reading. So that's just good character writing. And I knew that James S. A. Corey, both Daniel Abraham and Ty Frank are great at that based on some of the characters they wrote super efficiently in the novellas. Character work was great here. Prose I thought was better than Sibylla Byrne. I rated it a 9 out of 10. It was on par with Abaddon's Gate. The prose was clean. There weren't a bunch of mistakes. It was more careful. I thought the prose was good. Okay, so originality, I rated 8.5 out of 10. And the reason for that was I didn't think the overall story here was as creative as some of the other books in the series. So much of the originality here comes from the unique situations that the characters are placed into. Okay, so world building, as usual, I rated a 10 out of 10. There's fantastic world building in the Expanse, and there's just so much detail provided. I feel like the world is huge, okay? There's all these different things going on at far off locations. So world building, 10 out of 10. So overall, I rate Nemesis Games 9.1 out of 10. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me for my review of Nemesis Games and the Expanse. And I hope you continue to join me on my journey through the Expanse series. So what's up next? I would very much like to continue and read Babylon's Ashes here so I can finally watch season 6 of the TV series. And also I won't know what's going on at all in this book, which would be awesome. But I'm going to take a palate cleanser first. So this is not coming up just yet. Next up, I am going to review Termination Shock by Neal Stephenson. And this will be my first Neal Stephenson book. So I'm pretty excited about that. So we'll do Termination Shock and then go back to Babylon's Ashes. So to keep track of what's going on iWizard, please subscribe, hit the notification bell, and I'll see you next time. Bye.